with this big blank sheet of paper because I have two things I need to take care of that I'm going to try to do all in one swoop. So one is that this is my collage paper bin. I have this out for workshops, for my own art use, and as you can see, it's overflowing. And I'm trying to be a little more strict with myself. I tend to like hoard these wonderful paper bits, but I need to use them up at least so that it's down to the level that it fits in my box better and I can store it away until the next time I need it or the next workshop. So I'm going to do whatever amount of projects I can do, and either if I'm not going to use them, I'm going to throw them away, but it's much easier for me to use them than to throw away any of these precious little bits. So I have all kinds of scraps. I have magazine things, I have some napkins in here, I have little paper trims. I actually love to use these things. Some magazines, just paper sack, all kinds of wonderful things in here. And I also need to make a series of small pieces. So I have been just like creating some backgrounds to have ready, but I thought what better way than to glue down a bunch of papers. Later I can add paint or whatever I want to do with them. So I have this big sheet of paper. I'm going to cut it down later into smaller pieces, but to start with I thought it would just be quick and easy to just put on all these collage papers. Now this is pretty thin paper. I'm using this Canson. It's only 98-pound paper, so it's pretty thin. It is a mixed media paper, so it'll hold up to wetness okay. I've used it before, but not particularly just for a piece of art. I've used it as journal pages and things that works quite well for. So I'm familiar with the paper and how it works. And again, I would not usually work on something this thin, but since I'm collaging papers on it, I know that that's going to give it a body and weight to work with later. So I am also I've pulled out a jar. Now these are yogurt jars that I refill with matte gel medium because it's just a handy size to use. And then I put this silicone cover that I just bought on Amazon on top of it, and these work pretty well. If you use a screw-on lid, the lids always get glued on and are hard to get off, and I don't have patience for that. But this system has worked fairly well. You can't wait, you need to be using it somewhat promptly, and it always gets little crusties and I have to soak them loose from time to time. But this system has worked pretty well for me. And I don't like I buy, this is Liquitex Matte Gel Medium. It's my favorite to use. I use it a lot, so I buy it by the gallon bucket. I obviously want a smaller container that's more handy to work with as I go. And then I'm pairing that with the 1.5 inch. This is a Master's Touch silicone brush, and it is my favorite for applying the matte gel medium. I also sometimes use these for paint, but especially for gluing things on or even a finishing coat. So that said, I'm gonna just start getting busy and gluing some things down onto my sheet. I'm not going to be real picky about what it is. I'm just adding some pattern and texture here, and anything that I don't like I can paint over. In fact, a lot of it will be painted over later, so I don't have to worry too much about color or anything like that. If I have a straight edge like this, I tend to put it along a straight edge. Otherwise I kind of like torn edges. I feel like they're a little easier to blend into your piece of art when it's all said and done. So I have bits of scrapbook paper, I'm just kind of starting in, gluing things down, see what I end up with. So as I work, I'm just kind of nesting papers in right up next to each other. I'm not leaving any white space, or at least very little, on the paper. My goal is to kind of have a solid sheet of collaged bits by the time I'm done. So I'm just carrying on with that. And you can see here some of the kinds of papers I have. I have papers that my grandkids colored on, and I have papers that are from a coloring book, and some Citrusolve altered papers and magazine papers, and just all kinds of little scraps and bits of papers that just have some little interesting bit on them or an interesting color. And I'm not super worried about color scheme here, but I am kind of being mindful of things that, like, I rejected that blue tissue paper because it did not seem to kind of go with the rest of what was evolving on here. I also like to kind of scatter similar bits around. So like from the same magazine image, I'm kind of tearing it and putting it in different places on the page. And even though these will end up on separate artworks, I kind of like the idea of these being kind of a series. So they will all have some similar colorings, and I don't even know what kind of art they will be yet, whether they will be landscapes or abstracts or still life, and maybe there'll be an assortment of all of those things. I'll wait to decide that later. So I don't even have a real subject or scheme in mind for these. I'm just doing this as a beginning point, and then kind of let the art lead me when I get to that point. So right now I'm just having fun gluing. I'm trying to make every little area have something interesting going on. These pieces, I'm going to cut the sheet down into 6 by 6 inch pieces, so they won't be very big. So I want to make sure every little panel will end up with some interesting tidbits on it. You can see that the piece is looking a little filmy where that gel medium is on top of it, but it will dry clear, so I'm not worried about that, because by the time it's all done and dried, it will be all clear. And now that it is magically dry, I probably waited a couple hours in there. I'm pulling out my Caran d'Ache Neocolor 1 crayons. These are the ones that are not water soluble, and they're are still a fairly new thing for me. I've used the Neocolor 2 for years, but the Neocolor 1 I'm still just kind of trying out and learning. And I thought this would be the perfect time to use them, because I intend to paint and create on top of these, and I don't necessarily want marks that are going to reactivate with water. So I'm just adding in some mark making here to just add a little bit of extra interest to these pieces. I end up using a couple different colors. I use this kind of teal color, and then I also reach for this kind of pale peach color, which just will give some variety on here. So I have a dark color and a light color. I'm actually kind of trying coloring in a few of those white spaces here and there, just really loosely, just keeping it loose. Again, the idea is I just want every area to have something interesting, something to work off of. And, you know, if I don't like any of these things, I can always paint over it later. So that's not a concern. Again, it's not like I'm going to ruin anything or mess anything up. I'm just adding interest and texture to what will end up in the pieces. I have some kind of go-to mark making besides the scribbles. I just kind of do these dots. I am a fan of those. I like stripes. There's just some things that I keep repeating in my mark making, and I think that's part of, becomes part of our language artistically as we create. The next thing I'll do after I am satisfied with this, and the nice thing about the new color too is there's no dry time to wait on or anything. But the next thing I'll do is to go cut this up. This is an 18 by 24 sheet, and I'm going to cut it into 12 6x6 pieces. So I'm back with my little pieces of art. I'm just kind of turning them different directions, and see, there's nothing to determine which way's up. Even as I glued things down, I tried to not worry about that. So I am just kind of looking for things that maybe inspire me somehow or remind me of something. I'm just kind of twisting and turning them and see what do I think this looks like, or what can I pull out of this piece. So that's how I use these, and I really like this as opposed to sitting down to a blank white page and thinking, what do I want to make on this page? It's almost more like looking at the piece and seeing what it wants to be. At this point, I still don't have a strong subject matter in mind. I have things that I frequently do in my pieces, but nothing determined yet. At this point, I'm trying to totally just look at what inspires me in each of these pieces. I'm also just enjoying how these sheets feel. They're nice and crispy and crunchy, and they're thick because of the layers of paper, and they just feel good in my hands. I'm taking a Stabilo pencil now and just kind of sketching in those things I see. They might change from this, like this does not lock anything into stone yet, but I'm just kind of getting down some ideas. This first piece is going to be a still life, it looks like, at least at this point. And so I kind of sketched in this vessel on there with a flower. I'm adding in some little bits of paper on top to kind of go along with what's there, to kind of continue out the theme. So when I work like this in a series, I go back and forth between all the pieces. I usually do a little bit here and a little bit there, and just kind of keep rotating through the pieces until I'm, happy with them. And sometimes I do really get on, especially as it gets closer to done, I'll get on a mission and work on a piece until it's done. I've pulled out this sketchbook here to use as a palette. I like using sketchbook pages as a palette because then that paint that's on there becomes the start of a piece in the sketchbook. So it makes me feel good that I don't waste any paint. I love using matte acrylic. It can be kind of expensive though, so every little bit helps. And it's better than facing a blank page in my sketchbook as well. So right now I'm working on painting the negative spaces around that little bits that I sketched in. It's not necessarily fully sketched in either, so I'm using a little bit of imagination. I'm trying to work really loose here. It's easy for me to get too detailed and fine-tuned, and so I'm making an effort to try to keep loosened up. There, I just cleaned off my brush just a bit on the sketchbook page before I switch color. I typically don't wash out my brush really well. I'll get, excess paint off, but I don't mind if a little bit of that blue or hints of it mix in with that orange because, this is actually kind of a coral color that I mixed myself. But I feel like that just makes the piece more cohesive. So I might swish it out in water, get a little bit of it off, but I don't worry about having a clean, super clean brush, usually. each time when I switch colors. Now, totally shifting gears here on the next piece. This looked like a barn to me. I think it was part of an image of maybe a truck or something. I can't remember what the original paper bit was. But to me it kind of looks like a really long barn. So that's what I'm going to try to bring out of it. I'm going to keep anything that is barn and get rid of the things that aren't barn. And so then that kind of implies maybe some sort of farm scene or landscape type situation for this barn to be settled into. This type of work is really low pressure because it's not very high stakes. You know, these may not all turn out, and that's fine. And by turning out, I mean they may not all turn out as what I originally started them at, but you know, they will at least be a background for something else down the road. So there's kind of a no-fail situation here, and that I think helps us be a little freer in our work. When we put so much pressure that every little move we make has to direct it towards being a masterpiece, then that's what gets us into trouble. This one, I think, looked like a city scene with a couple buildings there on the left side that were already there, and I just did some paint strokes to kind of imply some additional buildings. I'm going to let that dry and move on to the next piece. As you can see, I'm working fairly quickly. I'm trying to not think too much, not spend too much time deliberating, not put too much pressure on myself, keep it loose, keep it moving, and just play with it and have fun and enjoy the process and not worry so much about the results. Another still life shaping up here. Some days are just still life days, some days are bird days. You know, I think it kind of depends on the mood I'm in, and these particular pieces seem to inspire still life pieces to me. If I took the same panel on a different day, I might end up, you know, with something totally different. So today looks like we have a number of still lifes getting ready to happen. So as I painted in that pot with that kind of coral paint color, I was careful to not cover up too much of the paper. So definitely defined as a pot, but with plenty of paper still showing through. And that's part of the look that I love about these. I really like the loose collage and paint where you can see some of the elements still left there. So as I work in with the flowers, I'm painting the negative spaces again. I've just very loosely drawn in. I want more of the idea of flowers than necessarily precise flowers. So I work in and around. That face is leaving us. It doesn't really make sense with the piece. You know, if it was a different thing that came out of it, I might have kept the face. I don't know. But that face didn't belong in my still life, so I kind of painted over it. Here it looks, I get the feel of a landscape right away because of that paper that's at the bottom as I orient it. And I also feel like in that white sheet that's like a coloring page torn from a coloring book, those kind of give me a feel of like swirling clouds or something. And I don't know how much of them will stay showing, but that's what inspired me to make this be sky and the land below land. You know, later this could end up becoming a still life. Like, none of these are locked into stone. Usually, whatever I go with, like whatever the first impression was, I usually kind of stick with that, but there's nothing to say they couldn't change and turn into something else down the road, and if I'm not happy with how they turn out, they might become something totally different. So, keeping with the landscape theme, though, I decided to really loosely paint in the implication of some trees. The advantage of working in series is you can add some paint and then set it aside to dry, move on to the next piece, and so on. This one also made me think of a tree with that green paper at the top. And so I'm kind of just planning in a tree. I'm not sure what else is in here, but that part in the upper left corner, it looks like a building. Maybe it was a building in its original state. But I'm just kind of filling in as if I'm going to create a bit of a landscape or maybe a cityscape. I'm not sure yet what it's going to be, but I'm just kind of choosing a direction to head it. So I'm filling in some more leaves for that tree so that it carries across most of the top of the page. When I'm using the colors from my palette, or also the sketchbook page, I'm not mixing them like super well. I might mix a color a little bit, but I keep it kind of loose and let it blend together more on the page. So I just sketched in where I thought maybe a building would go, and I will come back to that later. It's the next morning, and I'm going to show you what I have done so far, and I'm ready, I think, to push most of these towards completion. So I have pretty much like identified what the composition is going to be on these, and done the bulk of, there's still some problem areas on each of these. Got a couple landscapes in here. This one I like quite well. I may call it done. Not sure. This one's very close. So I'm just going to go in and do the little last touches on these and get them finished up. Having a bit of coffee this morning too. While I work on this. Okay. For finish work, I've gone to a little bit smaller brush, getting a little bit more of those negative spaces worked in. I really love the look that painting the negative spaces gives, and letting that paper color show through in this foliage. And I just would have a hard time painting it to have that look. And so it's one of my favorite techniques. I'm using that Stabilo pencil. I've kind of gone around some of the edges and shadow areas, and I'm just kind of wetting it down and deepening some of those in the, just to add some contrast and some shadow. I'm making these oranges a little bit more orange colored, being careful again to not entirely cover up what's there. Switching pieces, I had kind of defined this little section of the paper that was there as like a coffee mug or something, so I decided it needed a handle. So I cut a little handle there again. There's no rule that says I can't add more collage on there. I'm just kind of toning it down a little bit with some blue to make it match the rest of the mug, and setting it aside to dry, and then quickly moving on to this piece. I felt like it needed a third white element. I'm liking where it's headed, but I just felt like it needed a third piece of something on there. So I made this like little sugar bowl out of, it's a scrap of notebook paper. Stick it on, and then I'll move on to it after it dries. And this piece is kind of a puzzler for me because I painted these flowers all wonky. So I've got to think about that a little bit more. This one is that barn, and I have drawn in the windows and door, which definitely make it feel like a barn. But it's obviously not completed yet, so try add some flowers in for now. Work on that tree, and that's kind of back behind the barn a little bit, and set it aside. And as you can see, I'm kind of rotating through most of these fairly quickly. Gonna mix a color here, so I've pulled in that sketchbook again, and but I'm working through them very quickly, just kind of adding little bits here and there. And I find value in not staring at one piece too long and just acting on like first impressions as I look at it again, as I look at it in its new state, after, you know, some progress has been made. And I just keep rotating through, looking at them, getting those first impressions. So blending things together a little bit more here, changing up the tree a little bit, just defining things a little bit more, blending the leaf area in a little bit. I really like this olive green in the golden so flat. But the biggest thing I did with this piece is I cut out this little park bench, and I made this little paper park bench to go on there to kind of make sense of the piece, because it didn't make sense to me. You know, there's this building, and there's this tree, and there's this red area, and you know what's going on. And I don't need things super defined, but I need it to have a little bit of a story to it. And so I think this park bench just really is what it needed. So I'm happy about that. The city scene has this little corner that, again, doesn't make sense with the rest of the piece. So I decided to cut a little rectangle here. This was some gift wrap, said over the hill, I think, over and over on it. But I kind of like the effect of the letters. You know, in a smaller piece, you can't really read what it says, but I like the look of the letters. So I decided I'm going to add it on there. I chose for the words to go vertically because I felt like that kind of tied in with how the windows are on the other buildings that are already on the piece. So I'm kind of sticking that down and do a little bit to kind of blend things together, and then I'll come back to that later. I realized my little park bench was missing its back legs, so I jumped back into that and stick some little back legs on there. Little details like that can matter. I try to keep it loose. And I'm adjusting the color of these leaves. They were a little too grass greenish for me, so I'm going back in with some of that olive green and kind of making them a richer color. Always being careful to not entirely cover up what's underneath. I'm going back in and adding some dark areas. I think having some contrast just adds depth. Again, these aren't even intended to be realistic. They're more a feeling that it's expressing and not a realistic representation. But yet, those same values of contrast and still matter, of the composition, the contrast, all of those things, elements still matter. With that in mind, I felt like this needed some highlights on it. I'm choosing that in this piece that the sun is coming, or the light is coming from the right hand side, and using that consistently on my flowers. This one has a problem in that this base is just too tall. It doesn't feel right. So I'm actually going to use that technique in negative spaces painting. I'm going to shorten the vase here. So this is an example where, you know, no move that you make has to be a permanent one. That's one thing I love about mixed media. It's very forgiving. And if you don't like something, just paint over it or stick some paper over it and you're good to go. I like it much better now. Just feels like it's not crowding off the page, I guess, quite as much, which I don't mind if it's intentionally going off the page, but this just felt like I was squeezing things in, and I wanted to have a little bit more room for those flowers. I kind of struggle with what color exactly the flowers should be. I don't want them to be too matchy-matchy with the table, so I decided to add in some white. Then I'm not totally happy with that, so I add some red or some darker color, and I just keep kind of going back and forth with these. And that's the advantage again of this mixed media. You can layer to your heart's content. Now I'm deepening up those shadows a little bit. I've used some Stabilo pencil, and again, it's just really handy for getting those little shadow areas in, and just get a little bit more depth established in the piece. Set it aside to dry, move on to the next. This is another one where I felt like there needed to be a little something more in the piece, so I'm also making a little pot for it. I chose this coloring book paper because I like the fact that there's a bit of design already on the pot. It just already looks interesting. And I'm going to stick it down, and I'm going to let it just go off the edge of the sheet. I could have cut it down smaller so that it fit, but I think it's a little bit intriguing to have things just going off the page. I have been thinking a lot about taking, as if you're taking a closer look at things, and like you're kind of zoomed in on it, and part of the subject is going off the page. I'm using a Stabilo pencil and some dirty paint water to add a little bit of shadow of that piece before I set it aside. And on to this landscape, which I am not very happy with, but I decide maybe what will save it, or help it at least, are some little sprigs of grass that I have cut here. And so I'm gluing those on. They're cut from comic book and some citrus oil paper and various things. And I do think that helped the foreground quite a bit. I'm adding in a little bit of glow to the sky. Again, having some of that color that carries through from the orange in the trees to the orange in the sky to the orange down in the grasses. And I just kind of like it when there's colors that kind of carry through like that. And then I decided the trees are a little bit boring, so I am adding in some bits of white paper onto those, and it's looking better. So set it aside, pick out the next one to work on. I'm back to this pot here, and I'm using my fingers because I can get the paint on a little thinner with that and have a little bit more control over what shows through, and I want some of that design from the coloring book to still show through. Going back again with the Stabilo pencil, defining those edges, using a little bit of white paint to get the handles and do some little more fine-tuned touches, a little more detailed than what my fingers can do. So I think it looks a little bit too ho-hum, or like it's just stuck on, and so I add a little bit of that coral that's on the pot and a little bit of the white from the little sugar bowl onto the base. I also decided to adjust the colors of the flowers a little bit. I kind of want to introduce another color into the piece, so I add some yellow on there, along with some white highlights adding in. Again, here towards the end, I'm starting to pay more attention to my contrast of values, so I'm kind of trying to encourage that a little bit. Also doing a little bit with the smaller brush. I'm doing a little bit of touch-up of my negative spaces, kind of just getting things a little pinpointed, defined better. I want to add some more leaves in, so I'm getting another color of green that I have not used yet. It's a lighter green. Just putting in some highlights on the leaves and adding in some leaves. Then going back and adding some definition to those with that Stabilo pencil. You can see that I rely a lot on the Stabilo pencil. I used it pretty exclusively on these pieces. Another favorite that does similar thing is the Derwent Inktense pencil. I also use those a lot in the similar way, but I honestly use the supply I have handy. So once I started using this Stabilo pencil, that's what's laying right there, and that's what I'm going to use. Jumping back to this piece with the yellow vase, I'm adding in some definition and more shadow with the Stabilo pencil again, and just kind of reevaluating it for shadow and value, and see if there's enough contrast, and adding whatever I think it needs. Okay, so I have this nice little stack of finished 12 by 12 pieces. I'm going to scan these, decide which ones could be prints, or they might be for my patrons, or I don't know exactly what yet. My favorites I will probably mount on a wood panel, you know, to hang. But all in all, I'm pretty happy with the results of this little series. My goals were to use up some of my paper stash, to create some small works that would be for sale, and also to practice working loose and being loose with collage and paint. So those were my goals. So mixed successes in these. There's some I really like. Most I kind of like, at least, and there's a couple I'm not so sure about, but all in all, I'm pretty happy with these. So I'm just going to go through these and see what you think. So I did try to leave some of the collage paper showing through, like this was collage paper. It's collage papers up here, because I think that's, I want to take advantage of what the paper brings to the piece. Most of them I had, like this shapes was kind of there, and it gave me the feeling of this barn, so I just kind of went with it. So some of them were really inspired by the paper. This piece was probably my least favorite at one point, and now I really like it, and I think adding these grass things in really helped. And so then I decided to do that on this piece as well. Ended up really liking this piece, though. I think it's kind of fun. This one, some of them I added more collage onto as well, even in these still lives. I think this improved it. I have a lot that's like, I'm kind of playing with the idea of zooming in close so that part of the image is actually off the page. So this is an example of that. This one I'm not crazy about, but I do kind of like the color combinations, and I think it's fine. This is one that I really was puzzled of how to work with what was there. But the park bench, I think, really pulled it all together and made this piece work. So I'm happy with that little cutout park bench on there. This piece is just a little crazy. I don't know. I don't know if I'll be inspired to add something else. I did add this cup, also at a wonky angle. I added some, like, to kind of look like things are spilling, and give that look. So I don't know. It's interesting. I think it still has some potential. We'll see. This piece I really like. I love the colors in it. I think it's really lovely colors. I like the stripes on the vase. I think that was a good choice. I like the plants, foliage, whatever, that are in the vase, as I think maybe I like better than like some of the flowers. So I think that's something I maybe want to do more. I like the bowl, and it's just its original collage paper, as was even this little wonky corner on there. You know, I like it. I left some of this, was a magazine image with, which is what inspired the oranges. It had oranges grow like an orange tree or something on there, so I left part of that showing. I like that. There's just a lot I like about this piece, so it's one of my favorites, and I think maybe worth mounting on a panel. We'll see. I also really like this one. Again, I like the stripes in the background. I like the kind of scribbly floral things. I like the little cloth or placemat, whatever it is, that the vase is sitting on. I think that kind of was interesting. So I kind of like that. There's a little face peeking through down here, a little bit of comic book. I like the bits that are peeking through. Happy with that one too. This one I am turned out fairly happy with. I was, to start with, it just gave me the feel of a city, so I kind of did these swatches of color here and drew in some like power lines, I guess. I put this block here that kind of solved some problems in the foreground, and it's just kind of an abstract city scene, so I'm actually turned out happy with that one as well. Here's another still life. I liked it, but I think adding in this third white element was a good choice. Stayed pretty loose with it too. Another where there's this kind of a placemat on there. Pretty happy with that one as well. This one, this image was, I liked it. It was in the papers. And so I decided to make use of it as a coffee mug. And then I just kind of hinted at like a glass in here with part full. So I like the looseness of this one. So we're back to the beginning there, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video of making these pieces. You can find my artwork in my Etsy shop, which is linked below. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.